This is turn 26 of I Equipped My Heavy Crossbow. I found two magic sites. One is the Statue of the Sitting God. So this is actually kind of an interesting site. In addition to providing 1 pearl and increasing order, it provides an enchantment bonus of 20. That means that any enchantment spells or any enchantment rituals that I cast are going to have a 20% discount on the gems required to cast them. This isn't something that I'm going to get a huge amount out of given my build. If I do end up using it at all, it's most likely going to be Iron Corpse Reanimation, which it's too small to affect, and Chthonian Legion, which it can provide a bit of a rebate for. If it gets very late in the game, I might be able to use it to cast Earthblood Deepwell, and that's actually a fairly large spell. The enchantment discount doesn't actually apply to the bonus gems that I would be using in order to increase the cast cost of the global to make it harder to dispel. And if it gets very late in the game and I need Tartarian factories, I might use it to cast Lichcraft. Usually Agartha doesn't bother with Lichcraft at all, given that it has 2 Oracles in Conjuration 6, and those have Death 3, which is usually enough to do all of the death magic that you would need big mages for. Lichcraft, the extra level of D is only really useful if you are going to be boosting them up to be Tartarian summoners, or are casting large death rituals, which Agartha doesn't usually bother with. Now's as good a time as any to talk about my research, so I'm finishing up my primary research rush of Conjuration 5. That'll get me my full-size elementals, make me a lot more resilient against a potential assault from Pythium. And full-size elementals are also going to be fairly useful just in general. They're going to be able to provide a lot of firepower with 1 mage. So an F2 mage casting a size 6 elemental is kind of like him firing a fireball off every round for the entirety of the battle, and he can potentially even do that twice. Fire elementals also are... It's actually probably better than him firing a fireball off every round for the entire battle, given that fire elementals always hit, and they also are going to require some enemy attention in order to actually bring down. And then similarly, size 6 earth elementals are basically like non-routing, regenerating higher HP elemental, or higher HP elephants, given that they have to go through multiple forms before they die. So they're elephants without the usual weaknesses that people can take advantage of to remove elephants, so definitely very strong. Once I'm finished with Conjuration 5, I'm going to go down Enchantment. My primary goal is going to be Flaming Arrows right over here in Enchantment 4. That's going to make my crossbow hordes a lot more efficient, since they'll have an additional tick of armor-piercing damage. And then I'm going to continue going for Enchantment 5 in order to get Horde of Skeletons. That's going to enable me to mobilize all of my Reanimators in order to basically create a replenishing front line. And then the other site that I found is just Labyrinth of Skulls. That's just a generic death gem site, so I'm just going to get 1 more death gem per turn. I am advancing towards Marignon's capital here. This was just fighting a modicum of province defense, so not much to talk about here, other than that I get this thing back and this gold mine, which is essentially responsible for all of the income of this otherwise small and unimpressive province. And I am going to be attacking Marignon's capital. Given that Marignon can't get from here to here from the season, I'll be fighting only province defense with my Ichthyid raiders, who were successful in beating the province defense here on the Stinging Swamp. So I'll be able to do that and grab that. This province also has very low resource cost crossbowmen. At 7 resources, I can actually mass quite a few, even though it's a very small, low population province. Part of that is because it's a forest, which gives good resources. And part of that is because of the resource settings in the game, making all provinces just that much more resource rich. Here we saw Gath killing a couple of TNG's priests who were, for some reason, patrolling on this fortress. And then here, that was my raiding party, just beating up province defense. There's not a whole lot to say about these guys. Ichthyids have very high HP and protection for their cost, given that they only cost 10 gold, but they make up for it by having very poor magic resistance and lower attack and defense score. And the province defense here has some crossbows, so they kill a couple of my guys, but I've got 40, so they're enough to take on the province. Here I am retaking the province that the militia took, with a bunch of blind fighters and crossbowmen. Militia don't put up too much of a fight. Here, he actually moves onto this province right over here, which makes sense given that I've got this big old army bearing down on his capital. He doesn't want to, truck with that. I expect that he's going to be moving them up right over to here rather than trying to relieve the fortress. That's the other news. I breached the walls of the fortress here. A large part of that is owed to this mercenary group of sappers. So the mercenary himself brings 40 additional siege power, and each of his sappers bring an additional 5. So I didn't even need to use my my own national special sappers. I just had my mercenaries here to break down the walls. And given that he has very few guys in his capital, while the fortress itself is going to be very sturdy with 1100 defense, he's probably not going to be able to hold up the walls, which is usually the only thing that can actually keep forts alive. Here I took this province which had no PD from man, and I'd already checked with him, and he seemed, relatively okay with that, or at least he didn't send a long and annoying complaint. Here Ulm takes on Archocephaly's province with his little thug, so not much there, other than the fact that a bunch of rangers appear, which hints that Ulm may have lost a battle somewhere else, possibly against Jomon. And yeah, this guy's got a fear aura, which is what's responsible for routing these guys, fear 5. They routed right away because it's just a small amount of province defense, and they don't have much morale to begin with. And yeah. Here, so I had guessed wrong about where he was moving his army. I moved these guys over here to intercept. And then in order to retake this province, I sent over a small group of sacreds. And then his whole warband ran into my sacreds, and given that he has a lot of guys, even though my guys are better, they're still going to have no trouble killing these blind fighters. So I had my mage summon a lesser earth elemental, but because he's not a priest, these blind fighters are not blessed. So as a result, they don't get their regeneration, and they also have slightly lower protection, and most importantly, they are going to be heavily encumbered, because they have 11 encumbrance, so 11 fatigue building up per round. And while they're still able to hold relatively well, just on account of their high protection, they get chopped up by the halberds of the guys that they're fighting. Here in Man, so this is very exciting. TNG stormed and failed. So as we can see here, the Ghost King fighting in his dominion has some extra HP. He also has some Ghost Buddies, because he free spawns them from time to time when he's in friendly dominion. So Man casts Mist to reduce the precision of the enemy horde of cavalry archers. And right now they're just firing over the walls. And they actually kill the Mist caster. Another one of the guys gets hit by arrows and routes. And the rest of Man's Magister's Arcane are just shooting off lightning bolts. Once their script ends, they default to the enchantment summons. So they're summoning up a bunch of ghost wolves and such here. Lord of the Beams, the Ghost King, is running into a giant horde of archers. So even though he has Awe and Sphere Aura and a bit of protection, he's still not doing too great. He's able to survive somewhat, but his HP is steadily going down from the banishment that he's receiving. Now he's surrounded by the cavalry, and he's actually routing some of them because of his Fear Aura and from the wall things that are shooting him, but he does eventually die. Once he does die, he managed to rout many of the cavalry here, so you can see that they're running away. And TNG is able to run down almost all of Man's mages, and he actually did even trigger a rout. So the last of Man's mages is running away. Unfortunately, unfortunately for TNG, enough of his guys also routed, thanks to the HP leaving the field from the squads that were routing and the wall arrows that were just shooting down on them this whole time. So as a result, only the Khan here is not running away, and he eventually will from the wall arrows actually kill him even. So as a result, Man actually wins the battle, keeping his fortress, but he also loses every single one of his units. His Pretender died in battle, and retreating mages actually are removed as well when they are retreating from a fort. But because TNG is an AI, he didn't actually leave a solo guy behind in order to hold down this thing, in order to hold down the fort so it remained sieged. so man is able to build here, and more importantly, he didn't secure a retreat path for himself, so that means that he also lost all of those cavalry which ran away. So man has literally nothing. He has absolutely no units, no province defense on his capital, but now he has income again. So he's going to be able to start recruiting Magisters, Arcane, and units, eventually retake some of this stuff. But he's also very, very vulnerable. So what I should have done, having seen this, is to immediately route this army, once it finishes storming this castle, assuming it wins, over onto man's capital, and then immediately try to claim it for myself before Gath or anyone else can get to it. I don't end up doing that in part because I just think that man is a cool player on account of his slightly innovative pretender build and the fact that he was fighting to the finish even when he was down to just a sieged capital. So as a result, I actually didn't go for him at all until I plotted my path to victory with what thrones are nearby and realized that I needed to take this throne, and I obviously would have had no way of doing that without fighting man. Given that, I actually do need to kill man, but I just didn't realize it at the time, and as a result I let man build up for several more turns before I actually start making a push against him. We have some events here, so severe famine, this is a very bad event, huge population loss and death scale. Here I get some gem events in spite of running Drain Misfortune because I'm just very lucky. And I finally finished this castle here, so I can start building yet more alchemists. Having more guys on the border with Pythium is nice for when Pythium comes to attack me later on, which it's essentially inevitable that he's going to do that. I can see the buildup of his forces right over here. I'm leaving 0 PD here because this is technically Pythium's province. He even had built a lab on it and had site searched it, so I'm giving it back to him. And yeah, as I'd mentioned, we are going to be breaching this fort right over here and storming the castle with our army. And we are going to be lifting the siege of this fort with this little group over here. Given that my blind fighters were able to form so well with a bless, this should be absolutely okay, especially with the crossbow support that they're going to be bringing along with them as well. However, I don't have enough guys to hold either of these two places, so these guys are set, or this guy's set to retreat, and he's moving right over here to site search this province. These guys are going to be retaking this, and depending on where these guys go, they might be able to move up to cut them off. Here, similarly, I can expect that he's either going to hit this thing with his fort, or with the guys in his fort, in which case I want to have these guys over here to basically help join that fight. And if not, I definitely want these guys out of the way over here in case he takes this province. I'm not going to bother pumping up PD because I don't have enough guys there in order to basically move into position to intercept this group quite yet, because in order to do that I would need to take guys away from my storm force here, and given that I'm not 100% sure of exactly what's inside this fort, I definitely don't want to do that quite yet, because yeah, I need to be able to make sure that I win this upcoming battle. So I'm basically using the same formation that I had. I'm leaving one light infantryman here in case I fail to take the fort, then I at least retain the siege. Yeah, the only thing worth noting, I guess, is that I have these guys up here as a initial arrow bait so that it's not going to hit these guys quite yet. Given that I'm casting Divine Blessing, I don't need individual priests behind my front line here. In certain situations, you actually want to move your frontline guys up in order to clog up the fortress, and then push your way inside. This is something that you want to do if you plan on winning the fight more quickly. Given that I know that Marignon actually has a higher proportion of his army being melee guys as opposed to what I do, I'm going to leave my guys a little bit further back so that my crossbows can continue firing throughout the fight, and his guys are going to be spilling out of the fortress. And then by the time that they do, I expect that my guys will have moved up a little bit, so I can potentially envelop them and yeah, get an advantage from that as well. I can't guarantee the envelopment, because if he puts his guys at the very front and orders them to charge right out, then they are going to break out right away. But that's also going to be moving them closer towards my crossbowmen, so my crossbows will have an advantage as well. The best position that Marignon could take, depending on what he has, is something that I'll go over once I actually get into the fight and see what units he actually has. So we definitely have some battles upcoming, but nothing too exciting for this turn. And that's the end of the turn. This is turn 27, So Man got back to me about something that I'd been poking him about, because his capital had been under siege. He was a little bit literally occupied. I thought that was funny. Gath called his Malak a prophet. So this is actually something that's useful to do with Gath if you, for whatever reason, lose your initial prophet and had a chance to summon up some angels, because those guys are flying. I think they're mat move 4 even, stealthy units, so they make excellent prophets. Here, as predicted, Marignon goes around my army and hits a thing over here with little defense, and he does the same over here in Histria. Here we see another battle in who are these guys? Archocephaly retakes a province that Ulm had taken a while ago, but he's definitely making steady progress. This is a giant group of guys with war elephants, definitely bigger than any army that Ulm had fielded so far, and he has 9 war elephants this time. And then here, he actually wins a battle while losing the Gold War. So let's go ahead and take a look at that one, because this one's definitely an interesting fight. So he's still keeping his guys clustered, so has to learn a bit there. He has a giant block of war elephants here on the flank, so again, he isn't putting these guys on the flanks and having the war elephants in the center. He's still flanking with the war elephants, which might be a mistake, but might not be. It might not actually matter. And Ulm is frontlining with his rangers. I think these guys are sick or something. Well, they're definitely all beat up. A lot of these guys have afflictions. I think he's just frontlining with these guys just so that the fight takes a little bit longer. And he's using a mini communion here. So 1 master, the black priest right here, and 2 slaves, the illuminated ones. And the vampire queen, called Best Girl, is firing Shadow Blast. So this is a very good use of his pretender. With Death 4, Shadow Blast is going to be hitting a fair amount. It's a large AoE spell, so when you're fighting outnumbered, you can definitely do a lot of damage with it. The one downside, or the one thing I think that he might potentially be able to improve on, is placing her a little bit further forward, since she's going to suffer a precision malice from the distance that she's firing from. She seems to be doing just fine, though, and she wipes out a couple squares of those crossbowmen, so that's definitely going to be part of their losses here. Archocephaly did correct his previous frontline issues, so he widens them. Yeah, you can see the accuracy is not too great given how far back she's sitting. But Shadow Blast does have great range, so he's at least able to shoot at them. And when he does hit, yeah, it's devastating. So that's probably a good portion of Archocephaly's losses here. And yeah, so he causes some friendly fire to his province defense there, but he actually is able to rout the front line. And this is what that communion was doing, so definitely an interesting tactic here. He has this guy communioned up with the 2 slaves and cast Earth Power, and then he uses that, or I think he actually casts Power of the Spheres. Yeah, Power of the Spheres, because his Astral level went up as well. And then he's casting Earthquake, so that's going to hit the entire battlefield. Doesn't do a whole lot of damage, because Earthquake is only 8 AP damage, and it's also negated by magic resistance. But he's able to rout a bunch of Archocephaly's guys, but now the War Elephants are in the mix, and yeah, they are very effective. And they just stomp over the remnants of Ulm's army, but they appear to be routed themselves. Oh wait, no, they're not routed, they're just chasing after this vampire guy, the Blood Marshal. I was wondering what was going on with that. But yeah, so the Blood Marshal, he had been using it as a thug since he's in Friendly Dominion. Both the Vampire Queen and the Blood Marshal himself did not die, and the Black Priest was able to retreat after casting his Earthquake. So he only lost a little bit, including the province defense, and he did a bunch of damage, mostly with his Shadow Blasts and later Evocation from the Vampire Queen. He was even almost able to hold. Not quite, but almost. So pretty good there, given what he was facing / fighting against. Here my Ekwipt warriors continue their little rampage, capturing another province and raising a temple. Here I'm taking, basically just retaking my fort. Marignon had wisely left behind scout, so that's I would have left an infantry guy maybe because I value scouts, but given how he's doing in the game so far, it definitely makes sense to keep as many of his soldiers around as possible. Here, that's just his little raiding party taking one of my provinces. Here, I'm able to siege his capital, so just fighting capital province defense again. Well, not again, but fighting capital province defense. He has his he had a commander patrolling for some reason. I think, yeah, that was just sitting there. His chart maker here isn't casting a whole lot that's useful because, well, yeah, there's not a lot useful for him to cast. He's an A1 S1 mage. He also doesn't have very much research, so there's, yeah, not a lot on that account as well. I've got my little flanking squad of Shard Whites here, and my core of Blind Fighters, who are blessed up for regeneration and added protection, and then my mercenary company of Heavy Crossbowmen here. So I've got a couple mages all casting their Fireflies, and my Blind Fighter frontline is quite resilient, so it's able to take on the light, or I guess you could call these guys medium infantry that are the core of Marignon's province defense, but they don't last all too long. Meanwhile, my Shard Whites here are flanking, and they advance up towards the archers. They take a brief second to chop up some of these retreating infantry, given that they literally just ran into them on their way out. So unfortunate for those guys. And then soon enough, they're in amongst the crossbowmen as well, who have already started taking crossbow fire from my mercenaries. And yeah, that's the fight. I end up losing nothing, because my Blind Fighters are just so tanky, and my Shard Whites are fairly resilient as well with their high HP pools and protection. I lose my undefended province here, which is basically just something that I was ceding back to Pythium, because this had been his province to begin with, so no PD there. Here, these are the guys who had been just chasing around this army. I hit this province basically just to retake it, and now I'm moving up over here just in case that's where Marignon sends this group over here. And then finally, we get to the battle at the fortress. So I win this one as well. As you can see here, our armies are actually fairly close in size. He has almost as many crossbowmen as I do. I actually have more of a front line than he does. So I had thought that he had more infantry, but apparently I was wrong. Our portions are quite similar, and I actually only had a slightly larger band. But luckily for me, my guys are just like super elite, and his are mediocre. So he's forming a mini communion here with his guys, but he has only one communion slave from the looks of things. I think he'll have more later. No, so his communion is apparently comprised of 2 masters and 1 slave. Presumably that's just to reduce fatigue, I guess, instead of actually be useful. So that's kind of an unusual decision. Usually one at least 2 slaves, because 1 slave doesn't add anything as far as cast or path bonus goes. He's got a bunch of crossbows and of course his fort arrows, but I have even more, so yeah, I have the advantage of just superior numbers here, and my guys are shooting at his crossbows, who appear to be densely packed, so he might have either changed his formation or left some crossbowmen without commanders in the middle of his formation. So he had a bunch of fire drakes here. He summoned these guys up to provide an area of effects armor-piercing fire damage attack, so they're potentially quite useful, but unfortunately they are getting shot at by a bunch of crossbowmen, and they don't have any particular protection against that, given that they have no shields. His army is also starving, which definitely contributed to his loss here. When you're bottled up in a fort, your guys can starve quite easily, which provides a major penalty to morale. So even though they're fighting in friendly dominion with potentially a large amount of bonus morale from his leadership, they're routing quite quickly once they suffer some losses from my own crossbow fire. So as a result, his starving, low morale crossbowmen rout long before most of them would actually have died, and his guys are now spilling out of the choke point without much in the way of fire behind them, while my sacreds advance. So my crossbowmen have then started switching to these guys who don't have shields, and they also have morale issues of their own. The lightning bolts that his mages are shooting are doing a little bit of damage, but not a whole lot. And my crossbowmen are, dishing out a whole lot of hurt. And as you can see right here, I actually do benefit quite a bit from being able to get the surround on his guys. So my Sacreds actually are covering a much larger surface area, so I have more attacks coming in than he has hitting me. And then I've got these Cave Drakes here, which are actually tanking up a fair bit of the evocation, so you can see that they're getting smited and hit by lightning bolts and so on. So the Cave Drakes do go down, but my more valuable Blind Fighters do not. So that's exactly what I got the Cave Knights for. They definitely do their job. And his guys just get sniped by my massive hordes of crossbowmen, and I take the fortress. So, given that he had all these mages here who were being minimally effective given the low research level and the fact that he wasn't able to build an effective communion with the guys that he had, he actually loses more gold than I had brought to the fight in total, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, because each of these mages is like 160 gold. So he actually not only had more gold fielded, he lost all of it because, you know, it was inside of a fortress, nowhere for them to run. Whereas most of my losses were these mercenary sappers right over here, and a handful of my blind fighters, and much of my extraneous front line. So these guys who I had moving up as flankers, and these guys who I had moving up as evo bait. I keep one of my cave drakes alive, so I'll probably be using these guys as evocation bait and just putting them in the front on their own. We get a wonderful event here, so a huge quantity of gold, some gems, and a free magic item. And we get another misfortune event, which adds to the misfortune already existing in the province, but that's not too bad. Two of my scouts get discovered, one by Pythium here on his throne, and one by Olm here on his fortress. And yeah, so that was a wonderful fight. I took this fortress, which I can then immediately start creating Chthonian alchemists out of. And I can move my army over here to go reinforce this force on his capital and start sieging that down more quickly. What else? Oh yeah, I am now going to be undergoing the long pursuit of Marignon's forces over here. So we can see that Man has started building up some units again now that his capital is liberated. What I should be doing is actually moving this force over here to immediately siege Man's capital, but as I'd mentioned at the end of the last turn, a little bit of sentimentality gets in the way, I guess. Over here, I am preparing these guys mostly to be able to respond to Pythium if he attacks. I'm starting to build up these guys just to be cheap lab rats since I don't plan on building too many more blind fighters from here. This guy's holding on to a group of blind fighters and crossbowmen and is probably going to be moving down, but I'm keeping him here just in case anything weird happens on the Jomanese front. Pythium actually is fighting Joman. I didn't get to see how this fight is going, but given that he's advanced into Joman's cap circle, and Joman has advanced only out to here, we can assume that it's going pretty well for him. Which makes sense given that he's a massive empire and Joman is a microstate. Here I moved back away from on top of this fort, or on top of this throne, where in spite of the fact that I'm building a fort onto it, and it might be safer to leave the guys there in order to protect it from indie events. I'm moving off mostly just to keep it to keep Gath happy, so that he doesn't see this ginormous army on his border. So you know he can be a little bit more comfortable with my having a throne to provinces away from his capital. He's busy fighting AI Tianqi. He's not advancing on his capital, which he probably should. Instead, he's just holding down that fortress. And yeah, Man doesn't have enough guys to actually move out. As far as the Arco Olmor goes, it appears that Olm is still playing better, but is just fighting from such a massive resource disadvantage that he doesn't have really any chance of winning. My Tritons are just moving around basically to anywhere where I have unrest so that they can patrol it down. And my Ichthyeids are continuing to be built over here because they're my only usable troops from these underwater things, and it's nice to have amphibious guys. I'm probably going to keep them here and potentially just keep them on hand as raiders for my eventual war against Pythium, which I keep talking about it needing to come, but I'm not going to be pursuing it at all until after Marignon is totally dead, and potentially until after Man is dead as well. And that's the turn. This is turn 28 of I Equip My Heavy Crossbow, and let me talk research for a second. So I actually deviated from Enchantment 4, given that my battle with Marignon went so convincingly that I was just very confident that I was going to be able to take his capital with or without flaming arrows. So given that, I decided to take a detour into construction for boosters here at Construction 4. That also is going to be getting me Legions of Steel at Construction 3, so that's another very useful battle spell, which my Earth Random Alchemists can definitely take advantage of. And yeah, now that I've hit Construction 3, I do have Construction 2 here as well, so I can start making Dwarven Hammers. And you generally want to get started on those as soon as possible, because you can often think of them as gem generators. So the earlier you make them, the more items you can make with them, and the more that you can get out of your discount. So here I retake one province lost to Marignon's raiders. Given that his capital is still under siege here, he is not getting any income, so he doesn't build province defense. Here I am taking a province back which he did have a little bit of PD on, but not a lot, and I have a bunch of blind fighters here with crossbows. Here he dodged one of my armies and is going in towards my fortress. And then here I finally did catch his army, and I lost almost nothing. So this little raiding party at least has been put down finally. It was definitely able to do a fair bit of damage, so goes to show that you can definitely get a lot out of raiders. So it's got these pikeneers here, who are my mercenaries who I don't care about. And then it's got a little bit of mage support, or a lot compared to what he has. So I'm summoning one full-size fire elemental, which unfortunately gets stuck behind my mercenaries. And one lesser fire elemental, which is stuck amidst my undead. So they don't immediately do a lot. But this fire elemental here, it's still in its first form, so even though it says it has 1 HP left, it's actually quite healthy. It just wrecks his front line, so it's got that AoE fire damage attack right there. Meanwhile, these guys over here are flanking, so they get in amongst some of the archers. So Marignon's army is routed extremely quickly. Before the heat aura from these fire elementals here can even torch any of my guys, Marignon's army is already gone. So I spent a couple gems to do it, but definitely worth it, given that I lost only one pikeneer, one blind fighter, and a crossbowman. So yeah, and this mercenary actually came with his own gems, so, you know, that's on him. I have him set to bless up some of my blind fighters here, and then to summon a lesser fire elemental. This guy here had been set to Phoenix Power, and then summon a full-size fire elemental. Given that he's an F2, he can actually do that. I could have had this guy Phoenix Power and then summon a full-size fire elemental as well, but that would have made it take yet another turn, and the lesser fire elemental only barely got to the front line as well, so I'm not at all miffed about that taking a bit. So I'm now actually splitting my army here amongst some map move 2 guys, so he's going to be bringing these penumbrals over to here. The reason that I'm doing that is that the penumbrals are going to be very useful in breaching Marignon's fortress. Given that they're ethereal, they're able to go through walls, so I plan on using them as flankers for the siege, so I'm having him basically just run ahead of the rest of the group. I'm having this army sit here to patrol in case he tries to run back over here and assumes that I'm going to be moving this army off. While here, I don't think that he's going to be going for this fort at all. So I'm basically just gambling that he's not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to be sending most of my group up here to cut off his group if he tries to go through here, and half of my group of blind fighters and a smaller group of archers over here. So interesting thing to note about this fire archer command is that because the archers here at the front are ahead of this guy in the squad order, they're all going to be firing, but this guy will actually run forward, so he essentially might become a flanker. So we'll see if that works out. And given Marignon's formation, I'm pretty confident that he's not going to actually go around my blind fighters and hit these guys, because he's always had his line in the center. So I'm very comfortable leaving my archers here on the side, where they can walk forward and be in range without, like, worrying too much. And they're still in skirmish formation, of course, just in case his guys are set to fire archers. Here, given the success of my last group of elementals against his units, I'm going to be relying on an all-elemental defense. So I have these guys set to each summon 2 fire elementals, these guys set to summon 2 earth elementals, and I'm burning a bunch of gems doing this, but I'm going to have an army of elite units, probably the strongest units that can be assembled at this stage in the game, and they're set to patrol to catch this army, and they'll be... most of these guys are just researching in the fort, so you don't need to worry about their positioning, but these guys are set on the flank so the elementals can go around my army, And yeah, we'll see if this works out, but we should be able to crush the army with my Conjuration. It's a little bit gem expensive, but as you can see, I have a huge amount of gems already, so part of that is just that I've had very good site searching, and part of that is just that I haven't really been spending my gems up until this point, but I'll finally be able to get some use of them, as we saw over here. And yeah, we'll see if that works out. Meanwhile, here I've got a bunch of guys just holding down the fort. I have added in the elemental summoners to my army over here. I haven't scripted this guy yet, but he's going to be scripted to Legions of Steel and Strength of Giants. So that's going to boost up these already very resilient Sacreds to be even more resilient, given that they're going to have +3 on their armor. Their full plate mail is going to go all the way up to 24. Even their shields are going to go up, so they're going to be nigh invulnerable to like regular ranged fire and so on. They'll still be susceptible to lightning damage, of course, but given that I'm on his capital very early, Marignon just hasn't built up all of that many mages. I have my elementals here on one flank. The fire elementals, like the ghosts, are ethereals, so they're going to be able to go through the castle walls, which is why I have them summoned here on the flank, so hopefully they'll go around the bulk of the fighting and just float over the walls once it becomes time to storm. And yeah, I'm shunting these crossmen back onto this army basically whenever I can, so I'm just using this guy to ferry them across, so that way their siege power is added. And yeah, I have additional firepower. The Ichthyids themselves are good at breaking the walls because of their high strength, but I don't actually want them to be tanking. In spite of the fact that they have decent HP and the warriors here have okay protection, they're nowhere near as tanky as the blind fighters, who I want to be the only ones actually receiving arrow fire. And given that they have the stone spears as weapons, they're also not too hard hitting themselves. So I do want to have these Shardglaives joining into the fight, given that they've got their awesome chill aura, very high damage attack, and so on. So these guys are going to be drawing evocation, given their higher HP, and these blind fighters are going to be tanking, hopefully, the regular units, given their position near the center. I have a couple of these Ichthyids added in here, but that's mostly just as a matter of leadership, given that this guy can't hold everyone. But for the most part, I want to keep these guys back so that their siege power can be safely added without them joining the fight, dying needlessly. I'm sending a bunch more scouts into Pythium, basically just so I can keep a closer eye on his movement, because I keep talking about this, but he's got this huge buildup on our border over here, and yeah, I do need to be ready to fight him. He actually agreed to peace with Jomon and withdrew, which further lends credibility to the idea that I'll be fighting him soon. I'm moving some guys up over here just to keep an eye on this border. But Jomon had actually told me about their peace, which was nice, so I knew that it wasn't just Jomon pushing them back, that it was Pythium withdrawing intentionally, presumably to get ready to fight me, so I need to be on the lookout for that. Here, I really should have gone for man, but yeah, mercy was my undoing. But things are going very well so far. I've cut off this raiding party here, and this one I can expect to cut off since there is nowhere for it to go. And that's the turn. This is turn 29 if I equip my heavy crossbow. Man is selling some gems. Man in LA has nature gems as part of his capital income and no nature mages, so it definitely makes sense that he would want to sell them. Here, we see that Marignon actually did try to take my fortress, as expected, and my elemental summoning worked out perfectly. So I've got my province defense here, quite a bit of it, so that they can tank up while my mages do their thing. As I'd mentioned, province defense doesn't count for HP ret, so even if every single one of these guys dies, my mages and their elementals are going to remain. And I've got 2 waves, as you can see here. So the summoning spells summon it in a square around the caster at random, so this guy got stuck behind the caster, unfortunately. But given that I've got room, he can definitely go around, no trouble there. My province defense is getting hacked up by his superior Sacreds and actually useful guys here, the Royal Guards with their high protection and good weapons. But my elementals are way tougher than the PD, and definitely tougher than the assailants here as well, and they are just stomping them. The fire elementals are doing full square damage, as are the earth elementals with their trample attack. So while those guys were wasting their attacks, reducing the PD here, which isn't doing anything, the elementals were going forward and just destroying everything. So I clearly only needed one wave of elementals, so I could have actually saved myself 10 gems there. But better overkill than underkill, and I hold off like easily. In fact, I'm able to kill almost all of them, and even if I didn't, he's got nowhere to retreat to, so he loses all of those guys. Here I retake the province, which had 1 PD, and I'm going to march forward onto this throne right over here. I don't remember why I had these guys patrolling instead of joining the fight on the throne. I think I was looking for a stealth squad. Anyways, so those guys are, or these guys here are going to be taking on this throne right over here. Oh, I remember. I'm having everyone patrol here because I want to see what's on the throne. That's what I was doing. So rather than immediately send my army onto the throne and have them die to some unexpected mage support, I have this guy set to hold and retreat. That first hold basically sees if you can get an idea for what spells are going to be cast and kind of what the enemy army's function is. You don't want to do that against flyers because they can swarm on you. But given that this is a throne without flyers on it, I can be safe on that account. Against actual players, I'll often tell to hold a couple times just in order to see a couple more spells being cast by the script. Here, I lost a province to a huge barbarian horde. Here, I got a bunch of gold for free in spite of running misfortune because real life luck. Here, I lost a bit of dominion, but I also gained +1 magic, which doesn't matter. Here, I have another barbarian horde assault, but in this one, they are held off because I have a bunch of units here because they just happen to be on their way. And these guys have no trouble taking on barbarians. So we'll take a look at that real quick, just to see why I was able to win this fight so easily. I'm guessing it's just my Sacreds being awesome. Yeah, I've only got 1 PD and only a couple of archers, but so the archers do whittle down barbarians quite nicely, and my Sacreds, my Sacreds are just awesome. So N9, E9 Sacreds don't take damage don't take much damage even from barbarian battle axes, so they rout that army very quickly. But here I didn't have quite the same advantage, so I am going to need to take it on with some actual guys. So this guy's casting Legions of Steel twice. That's going to increase the protection of these guys, and this guy's going to be blessing them up. He happened to be there to site search, so I can use him as a priest as well. And then this guy's going to be, doing the same thing, Earth Power, blessing, potentially some buffs after that. And then we already saw that a small group of Sacreds is able to take on barbarians without a problem, so if anything, this is going to be overkill. But as per usual, you always want to bring more than enough rather than not enough and lose. Definitely not worth taking any unnecessary losses. Here we see a giant fight, so we get to see Gath in action. I'm not going to comment on TNG's formation because it's just the AI, so yeah, the AI at least knows to make a manageable front line, but its exact positioning isn't exactly perfect. It defaults to actually some quite useful spells here, buffing up some of its guys with Strength of Giants. But it's using these cavalry, which are basically best used as elite lancemen, as archers instead, in spite of the fact that they've got Strength of Giants put on them, which basically means that they're just tickling these giants instead of charging them down. So whereas he could be using them to flank and start swarming over these guys, he isn't. So yeah, too bad for the AI. So Gath actually is now mixing in his humans with his giants much more effectively. Over here, you can see that the humans, because they've drawn a different target to these giants who are trying to target this squad over here, these guys here at the sides get stuck. So when you're doing a line formation that's very broad and you want to have your guys basically continue marching forward instead of try to like bunch up and hit the center here like these guys are doing, it might be helpful to have them set to hold and attack rear instead of just hold and attack. And here you can see that his humans get ahead of the giants here as well. So not a perfect formation, but it's doing the job well enough. And he's got these 2.5 blessed giants here with their bonus defense, partial quickness, bonus HP regeneration, and even some reinvigoration. And then some of these guys are just regular swordsmen, but a bunch of them are Sacreds as well. And then these guys have that same quickness going for them. given that the AI isn't like building communions or anything, they're not doing a whole lot. This is a very, very poorly equipped thug. So with the Boots of Long Strides, he's able to go very far with his Met Move 5. His invulnerability isn't really stacking with his armor fully, given that he's got such heavy armor on it. I guess it's an okay thug. It's just, I don't know, you're thugging a Prophet Malik. I guess it's got HP since it just flew in from Friendly Dominion. And it does have like that bonus there. It's just, I think that this is like kind of a light thug. It's something that you want to send off on its own in order to go take on some province defense and stuff if you want to go raiding. I guess it's doing okay, but it got hit by that decay spell, so it's decaying now. It's got a huge max age because it's an angel, and it's having frightened being spammed on it. So that's it's a morale 30 because it's got a prophet, so the frightened's not doing anything. It is decaying though, so that might actually matter at the very end. When you're surrounded by enough guys, you can eventually take damage, which is why you usually want to have, if you're like putting this much gear onto a thing, you usually want it to be way more like resilient. You want it to have a higher max HP and stuff. Given that it's fighting an enemy Dominion, its max HP is actually 10. So yeah, the Dominion penalty is reducing the blessing and such from being a prophet. So it's actually not regenerating at all until it gets very low. And it takes a bleeding wound, I think. No, that must be someone else. But yeah, eventually Gath wins because he's just got these awesome giant sacreds. In spite of his imperfect formation and very questionable build there. Yeah, so at the end of the fight, Decay triggers a bunch of times since the fight had already gone on for a while. He was already over halfway to max age. So he lost his prophet. That guy right there. He lost a couple commanders as well. I'm guessing that was just because he had no one sitting back, so given that they were set to hold behind troops, they marched forward. TNG, on the other hand, lost almost everything that he had. So the AI lost most of its stuff, and Gath still has most of his sacreds here. Although he still lost a couple of those as well, and these guys are not cheap. But yeah, Gath just lost a bunch of gear there. He might have gotten some of that gear back, but still. And yeah, aside from that, nothing. I think I've covered everything of note. I'm moving deeper into Pythium to continue scouting his land. And the siege on Marignon continues. And that's the turn. Alright, this is turn 30. I finally am pushing forward through my enchantment research, so now I do have flaming arrows. So I'll be adding that onto my sieging force on Marignon. I'm summoning a bunch of penumbrals. As I'd mentioned, these guys are going to be flankers. So I'm going to be having them brought on along with this Servant of the Oracles here. So I can bring them onto Marignon and have them go around his castle walls. My Nature Druid Duder here is sight searching, and where is he? There he is. We found a nice Nature Gem site, so that's 2 Nature Gems per turn. I can definitely use those Nature Gems for thugs. Here I retake a Barbarian province, losing only 1 Blind Fighter. We already saw how easily those Blind Fighters handle the Barbarians, so no trouble there. Here I scout this fort, or not this fort, this throne. I see the Indie Death Mages. These guys are going to be potentially Scale Spammers, or they might just waste their time casting, Sabbath Slave, and then make themselves useless. But aside from that, just infantry and some crossbowmen, nothing to worry about. I'm going to be sending my army in to go take that. This is a bad order event, given that I'm running Order Misfortune. Something I can see from time to time. Here, this is a negative event that happens when you have Death Mages, and I get assassinated by a ghost. So that's no fun. Sometimes you get assassinated by Solus, sometimes other more annoying things, in this case a ghost. And because it's assassination battle, I can't script him, so he's casting useless spells, he dies. So I lose a mage for free, that's no good. This is a minus Dominion plus gold event, but it provides a very small amount of, or plus income, provides a very small amount of plus income or gold. And in this case I didn't get any because the RNG just rolled too low. And yeah, here my scout gets attacked by Pythium's patrolling army, but I do get to see his army So he has at least these guys patrolling, so I know he's got at least a small band of guys there. I continue to be breaching the gate at Marignan. Briefly worth mentioning, Marignan's capital has this effect. I saw this in earlier turns, but I didn't talk about it. It basically just provides a small amount of damage, provides a percentage of dealing a small amount of damage to undead. And while that is affected by DRNG, it's usually not something that you have to worry about unless you have a bunch of like long dead or other low HP units. Because these guys all have 35 HP, they're not taking any damage worth note, and yeah, they're not even going to be suffering afflictions because it just doesn't do enough of their damage. If I'd been summoning lower HP undead, or if I'd been doing my iron corpses, which do not heal, then those could be whittled down, but because I'm only using high HP undead, it's not something I have to worry about. So aside from that, I'm going to be taking on this throne, and I expect to have no trouble, given that I've got this giant army of crossbowmen here, and I'm casting flaming arrows on them, so they'll be the first to benefit from that. I have a prophet here, so he was with the guys on that fort battle earlier, and yeah, I can expect to have no trouble taking on with this many sacreds. Only thing I guess kind of worth noting is I've got this cave drake here at the front in case the mages decide to cast Shadow Blast or other evocation. It can draw that. And then, yeah. As I'd mentioned in the last couple turns, and keep harping on, oh yeah, this guy was leading these troops, so the assassinated guy. Too bad. I'll have to send a guy to pick them up. But anyways, what I should be doing here is attacking man, but I'm not because I'm too nice. And that is turn 30.